If someone walked up to you right now and said, "I'm God," would you believe them? Of course not. You'd consider them mentally unstable. Words are cheap. Anyone can say anything. And I think skeptics actually have a very fair point when they push back on us and say, show me one place where Jesus flat out says, "I am God," in plain words. Go ahead, look. In a lot of places, he doesn't, at least not directly, and not in ways we'd expect. Here's what I want to propose to you, though, today. Jesus didn't need to say it because he was doing the things that only the God of Israel could do over and over again in totally unconnected stories written by different people for different audiences. Jesus keeps stepping into a role that, at least according to the Hebrew Bible, only God gets to fill. And the people watching him do it, they didn't say, "Oh, wow, that's a really cool trick." They said something closer to, "Who in the world is this man?" That question, that's the real evidence. Let's walk through it. Let's start out with a boat in the middle of a storm on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is asleep, actually asleep, in the middle of waves crashing over the sides of the boat. And if you know your Hebrew Bible, this is already ringing a bell, because there's another guy who falls asleep in a boat during a storm. Jonah. Same setup. And when Jonah wakes up, what does he tell the sailors to do? He says, "Throw me overboard," because the storm is God's judgment, and the only way it's going to stop is to deal with God directly. Jonah doesn't stop the storm. He doesn't pray for the storm to stop. Jonah knows that he can't. Only God can. So when the disciples wake up Jesus and he stands there and rebukes the wind and sea and it just goes still, I want you to think about how strange that would be. This isn't Jonah's story. This is Jonah's story with the roles flipped. And the disciples say to themselves, "What sort of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Notice they didn't say, "Hey, great miracle, Rabbi." They asked what he is, because in the Hebrew Bible, that's not a category that humans get to be in. Look at Job 9, Psalm 77, Habakkuk 3. Only God tramples the sea. Now, hold on to that and let's go to another story, because there's still one that surprises me every time that I read it. A paralyzed man gets carried in front of Jesus. And Jesus doesn't say, "Be healed." He says, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." And immediately, some of the religious scholars who are standing there go, "This man is blaspheming." And they're not wrong to be alarmed, because forgiving sin outright, not through the sacrificial system or through a priest or just declaring it done, that's not something that a rabbi does. That's something that only God does. And Jesus knows exactly what they're thinking. And he says, which is easier, to say that your sins are forgiven or rise and walk? And he says it plainly, so that you may know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. Do you see what's happening? He makes an invisible claim and no one could verify it. Then he backs it up with a visible sign nobody could argue with. That's the pattern. Actions proving what words alone couldn't. Now let's do one more. And this one's a personal favorite of mine. There's a leper, someone who in that world has probably not been touched by another human being in years. He has to walk around yelling, "Unclean, unclean," so that nobody accidentally brushes up against him. In that culture, leprosy was associated with death. The leper was considered to be like a corpse walking about, able to impart the most severe type of impurity. And yet Jesus reaches out and touches him. And here's the thing that people miss. In that culture, uncleanliness was supposed to be spread from an unclean person outwards towards someone who's clean. Touch a leper and you might become unclean too. But that's not what happens here. Jesus touches him, and instead of uncleanliness flowing out into Jesus, life flows out from Jesus into this leper. The direction reverses. The man is no longer the walking dead. That's a small detail, but I don't think it's a small thing. And right after that, remember, a Roman centurion comes to him, high-ranking guy, powerful, wealthy, and he says, "Don't even come to my house, Lord. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Because I understand authority. I say go, and another soldier goes." Jesus is absolutely stunned. He says, "I haven't found this type of faith in all of Israel." Now notice the centurion never sees a miracle before he just believes. He recognizes authority when he sees it. That's what faith actually looks like in this story. Not needing convincing, recognizing when the real thing shows up. All right, now let's go into what I think is one of the boldest of them all. Jesus feeds 5,000 men plus women and children. So we're probably talking around 20,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Afterwards, he sends the disciples ahead in a boat, and he goes up a mountain alone to pray. And then later that night, a storm kicks up again, and the disciples are out there straining against the wind. And here comes Jesus walking towards them on the water. Not in a boat near the water, on top of it. And they panic. They think it's a ghost, which, by the way, I love that detail because it shows you these aren't people who are just looking to be impressed. They're actual human beings, and their first reaction is fear, not faith. And Peter is the one who says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus says, "Come." And Peter does it, and he's actually walking on water, and then he looks around, he notices the wind, he starts to sink, and he cries out, "Lord, save me." Peter's the only one who gets out of the boat. That's key. And for a few steps, it actually works, until the wind reminds him what he's standing on, and then he goes down. "Lord, save me." Just 3 words. Jesus' hand is already there. I think that's the point, actually. Not Peter's faith or the lack of it. Peter just proved something. You can't borrow this. You can be standing right there next to the source, invited directly, and still not be able to sustain it on your own. Whatever Jesus is doing out there, it isn't a technique. It's not something that's transferable. And that's exactly what the disciples left on the boat conclude. Once Jesus climbs in and the wind stops, they worship him. Not impressive, Rabbi. They worship Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So here's where I want to bring all of this back to. And it's something I missed until I studied the Gospels from this cultural context lens. There's a moment in John's Gospel, totally different setting, where Jesus heals a man on the Sabbath, and the religious leaders, they confront him about it. And he says something I think explains everything we just walked through. He says, "My Father is still working, and I am working also." Now, that doesn't sound like a huge claim on the surface, but in that world, that's apprenticeship language. Sons didn't go to school and read textbooks. Sons apprenticed under their fathers. They watched, they imitated, until they became what their father was. So when Jesus says, "Whatever I see my Father doing, I do," he's not saying, "I'm a good student of God." He's saying, "I am becoming what my Father is." The same way any apprentice becomes what their father is. And that's why he doesn't need to walk around saying, I'm God, in so many words. Because an apprentice proves who they're becoming through what they're doing with their hands, not with their mouths. Calming the storm, forgiving sin outright, touching the untouchable, walking on water. These aren't party tricks that are stacked up to impress a crowd. They're a pattern. And the pattern only makes sense if the one performing these deeds shares in the very nature of the only one who the Bible declares can do them. So next time someone tells you, well, Jesus never actually said he was God, here's what I'd ask them to do. Don't hand them a verse. Hand them the whole pattern. Because a claim you can argue with, but a pattern like this, showing up across different writers, different audiences, different situations, all pointing in the same direction, that's a lot harder to explain away. This is exactly the kind of pattern hunting I do every week at Faith of Messiah. And usually it's a lot more in depth than this video because we just don't have room for that sort of thing. So if this is your kind of thing, consider joining my newsletter. You can jump over to faithofmessiah.com and get a free 5-day course on how to read the Bible. And don't forget to also like the video and subscribe to the channel down below. And remember, when it comes to the question of Jesus' divinity, he didn't need to say it. He just kept doing it. Sit with that for this week and start noticing where else it shows up.